everybody, today on Cars You Ignore at Your Peril, it's this, the second generation Citroen C5. And believe it or not, had you asked 19-year-old me what my realistic dream car was, I'd have said it was one of these. And as it happens, a decade and a half later, I think there's actually still an awful lot to be said for it. Generation C5 landed back in 2001, and though I am sure it's a car of many fine qualities, I just never liked the way that it looked. I always felt it was a very soft, sort of bland looking affair. But when this second generation landed in 2007, it brought with it a whole new styling language designed to be deliberately more Germanic, and I've got to say, as redesigns go, this is spectacular. Even now, 16 years after it came out, I think it's still a very good looking thing, particularly here in estate guise, or what Citroen called touring. Today, the car is also particularly noteworthy for three reasons. Firstly, it is the last pure estate that Citroen made, its successors all being crossover type things. Secondly, it was the final Citroen to feature a 6-cylinder engine, offered in the form of either the Ford PSA shared 2.7 litre and later 3 litre diesel, or, in certain markets, the 3 litre Peugeot Citroen shared ES9 petrol V6. But almost certainly of greatest importance to Citroen fans is the fact this car was the final outing of their magnificent hydraulic suspension system, here dubbed Hydractive 3 Plus. This was an innovation so famed throughout the world that even Rolls-Royce themselves leased it so they could use it on their cars, because, as far as they were concerned, there was no superior system out there if ride quality was your priority. Not all C5s came with that suspension, some instead being supplied with a traditional coil and spring setup. The towing crowd, I think, is particularly fond of cars with the hydropneumatic suspension because one of its many party pieces is the fact it will always level out the rear so the car sits correctly. That's handy. Mechanically, the car is a curious blend of the earlier Peugeot 407, the later 508, this landing essentially in the middle, and the mighty Citroen C6, with which it shares its suspension setup. So you have a double wishbone front and multi-link rear. Turning circle? That's not brilliant, but not horrendous for a car which is front-wheel drive only and 4.8 meters long. It's a big car, this. This is as good a time as any, I suppose, to talk you through the car we're featuring today. It is another French fancy bought to me by Lewis from the YouTube channel Limitless Media. Being a 2009, it's a pre-facelift example, though it does have the headlights from a later model, and with those, I think it still looks like a very up-to-date car. It also features some slightly larger alloys that are still genuine Peugeot items, the originals being 17s, these being 19s. Cosmetically, it's otherwise pretty standard, and in terms of mechanics, the only changes are a remap, bringing the power of this 2-litre 4-cylinder common rail direct injection diesel from 140 horses up to 170, with torque from 320 newton meters up to 370, and the exhaust has also been modified a little bit. By which I mean it's been kind of hacked apart so there isn't quite as much as there used to be. And honestly, I really don't know why people do that on an engine like this. It's never going to sound great, and put your foot down here and it just sort of, well, just... does that. That's not nice. There were both trim levels and engine options to choose from with the C6, everything from a 1.6 litre up to the aforementioned 3 litre V6s. Not all of them were available at all times or in all markets, and I would say here in Britain, this 2 litre 4-cylinder turbo diesel was likely one of the most popular options. Lewis and I were having a discussion earlier because we couldn't actually work out if Citroen even sold any petrols to the UK market. At the time these cars were introduced in 2007, we were going nuts for diesel. So although I think some of them were offered, nobody really bought them. And today, of the 60 examples of a C5 on Auto Trader, just 5 are petrols, of which 2 are the early first generation example, 2 are imports, and 1, complete with the rather rare 1.8 petrol, seems to be the only one that might actually be a genuine UK supplied second generation car with a non-diesel engine. There was also a plethora of trim levels to choose from, of which this, the exclusive, was the top model. And it gave you the panoramic sunroof, on the Estate, a power folding tailgate, that hydractive suspension, and a few nice touches inside. However, even that wasn't actually fully equipped, so this car is missing a few things, like xenon headlights, front parking sensors, and though it has nice heated massaging seats inside, they're also not quite as sporty as the base ones. And Lewis thinks he actually might have preferred those over these. I get that. The overall design of the interior is pretty decent. Sadly, this one is missing the extended leather option, which really would lift it, and I think they should have just given you a standard with the top spec car. However, for reasons known to them, they did not. The panoramic roof sadly does not open, much like the one on my 407. However, if you do have people in the back on a regular basis, it's an absolute delight. It makes the cabin feel a lot lighter, a lot airier, and for children particularly, it does help stop them being sick in the back of your car, which is certainly a bonus. Plenty of space inside for passengers, and the boot is a pretty generous size too, though as you may have noticed, it is currently jam-packed with filming kit. However, for your benefit, I'll put up the capacity on screen now. For those needing a slightly more up-to-date experience, the car was facelifted a couple of times around 2011 and 2012. That brought with it not just a new look for the outside, but also some tweaks to the inside, including a little bit of extra technology like Bluetooth phone connectivity. This one instead makes do with a Bluetooth adapter connected to the aux-in. Visibility is fairly decent. I appreciate the little quarter lights. The A pillars are much thinner than on many modern cars, and though the B pillars can be noticed, they're still set far enough back that they're not too intrusive. Overall refinement is also helped by the fact that the windscreen and the main 4 windows are also double glazed, which is nice. So then, now that I'm in the driver's seat, what are the things that I've noticed? Well, first up, much like my mother's Citroen C4, the middle of the steering wheel stays put and the rest of it moves, which I know is a really small and weird thing, but I like that because, let's be honest here, when you say French car to anybody, they'll say quirky, and that's the sort of thing that I'm talking about. The wheel itself is also fairly jam-packed with buttons, including ones to alter the displays up here, which are all actually surprisingly bright, clear, and very easy to read. You've also got settings here for both the cruise control and speed limiter. That's a function that honestly every car should have. You've got stuff like dual zone climate control, and in this, a 6-speed Aisin automatic gearbox, which has both manual override and also sport mode too, that I may be tempted to try in a little bit. Then back here, you've also got settings for the suspension, which you can lower or raise for driving temporarily and at low speeds over difficult sections of road. That is genius, and I like the fact they've got physical buttons for it. There's also a sport mode, which makes the whole thing quite a bit firmer, really very noticeable, and does make it corner a lot more flatly too. But again, I'll experiment with that when I get to a fun bit of road. Of course, you cannot talk about this car without discussing the ride quality, because it's magnificent. Those 19-inch wheels have certainly added a little bit of weight to the system and also removed a fair bit of squidge. I am told it is a little firmer overall than it was on the 17s. This is not a surprise. Even so, it's still a beautiful riding thing. Deals with all of the imperfections in the road with ease, and it's really quite magnificent. I can see very easily how some people wouldn't be quite so happy with it, because there is a lot of movement in the body of this car, and that's fine. I really don't mind that. It's actually a delight to have this in a modern car. It means that even over awful sections of tarmac, it's still a very pleasant thing to be in. It certainly doesn't feel quite as out of control as I recall the C6 that I drove being, but that was on a different road, so to draw a direct comparison I feel might be a touch unfair. The engine does a pretty decent job. Even in standard guise, these are still relatively torquey, and that 6-speed gearbox was a fairly modern affair for the time. It's even fairly economical. On one of the trip counters, it has managed to achieve an average of just over 40 mpg. And us geeky petrol heads are also likely to appreciate the other details under the skin, like the fact that the front and rear subframes are aluminium, meaning not only are they a bit lighter, they also won't rust. So then, though it's not really meant for this sort of thing, now we are on a nice little stretch of B road. Let's put both the gearbox and the suspension in sport mode. In fact, I'm going to go the whole hog and put the thing into manual, and we'll see what she's like when you put your foot down. I haven't bothered rigging up an exhaust cam because you don't want to listen to that, so instead I'll give you a running commentary. The steering is a little slow on the initial turn-in, very common for Citroens of the era. However, once you've got the car loaded up, it's not all that bad, and there's a little more feel and weighting to it than you might expect. It's still a far cry from an E46 or E39 BMW, but it does the job and communicates to you more than you might expect. The car also has no trouble whatsoever getting up to speed, and I've reeled in this traffic fairly quickly. A Smart for 2 and a Golf GTD. The gearbox is a little more responsive than I would have expected too. There are no paddles or buttons behind the wheel or that sort of thing. Instead, if you do want to control it manually, you have to do so with the lever down here that, of course, goes the wrong way, so forward for up. That doesn't really bother me in a car like this. It takes an element of brutality in first to get the traction control light to appear. Otherwise, it's generally absent, even in conditions that are not perfect. The weight is actually impressively low at 1,650 kilos, making it actually lighter than the convertible that I drove last time. I've got to say, it's actually a slightly more enjoyable thing to hustle than I would have expected, but this is certainly not its natural state. I'm still going around these corners with quite a degree of hesitation. Right, I've got a bit of clear stuff here. Yeah, no, this is... You push on and it starts to struggle fairly quickly. It does not want to be hustled. Oh, crikey. That was not me. That was the car dropping a couple of gears when I put it back into auto, but as it was still in sport, it thought I wanted fourth. I didn't. I want sixth, thank you very much. It's certainly what you'd call a 6 or 7/10ths car. If you wanted any more out of it, then you really should have bought the BMW. But on that front, if you are of my generation, or indeed plenty of others, and what you'd really, really like as a daily driver is, say, an E39 BMW 5 Series, you've likely noticed prices of those have gone up quite a bit. And, German though they may be, they're very needy cars now. Most that I seem to see need a lot of money spent on them. These, by virtue of being quite a bit more youthful, I think are generally going to be a lot less problematic. They're also certainly the sort of car that was never going to appeal to your boy racer. I cannot imagine anybody getting one of these as a drift slag. Though I'm sure the odd one may have seen a pair of McDonald's trays under the back wheels, I think it's pretty safe to say that's not the case for most of them. They're more likely to have been used as tow cars, as this was, for a rather large load, comically so. However, this really is their lot in life, and if anything, the biggest issue I'd say these suffer now is that the owners might not be particularly mechanically minded. So, if you are getting one, buy it either from a relatively reputable dealer, or make sure you can get a proper test drive. Sadly, the downside of these cars being packed with lots of nice stuff is that if any of it breaks, it can be expensive to fix. But in good news, these are yet another example of a car that's really benefited from diesel's change in fortune. So whereas about 5 or 6 years ago, there were still plenty of people that would have had themselves a diesel, now with the arrival of ULEZ, even those who aren't affected by it seem to be wanting to get rid of their diesel cars. And so that means if you want a lot of car for not a lot of money, you're going to struggle to beat the second generation Citroen C5. Examples start from about £2,000, with nice ones up for more like sort of 6 to 10. And if you can find something in the sort of middle there, for sort of 4 to 5 grand, with the higher trim, with some nice options, with the hydroactive suspension, this is a fabulous way to get into a car that is just a bit of everything. Essentially, it's a taxi. It's not a fancy car, it's not a sporty car, but it's got just about everything you need in it, and it's a little bit different. It also, I think, happens to be a damn good looking car. And even for me, though it's been quite some time since I've actually actively looked at one of these, as soon as I hit the classifieds to do my research for this piece, I started thinking, you know, as sensible, decent, ordinary, everyday cars go, this is a darn good choice. I know the Citroen C6 has the weird factor, the wow factor, but it's also likely to be a slightly more difficult car to run and live with day to day simply on account of the rarity. These, meanwhile, should be a little more livable. They were discontinued here in the UK in 2016 after a fairly rubbish 2015 where they shifted just 237 of them, compared with 6 and a bit thousand over in France. In any case, the model as a whole was discontinued in most markets in 2017, though did get a stay of execution in some others until about 2020, before it was finally replaced by the C5X, which I'm sure is great, but yeah, not the car for me. In any case, as it happens, this is. So, I want to say a big thanks to Lewis and Kirsten for coming out once again, and as ever, to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.